Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast.
Hello, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure, and today we're going to go down a very interesting path. A book landed on my desk recently called Psycho-Cybernetics, and it's the deluxe edition of an original text of the classic guide to a new life. And my guest today is Mitch Horowitz. He is the editor of this new book, as well as a teacher, a writer in his own right as well. And we're talking about this remarkable book, which came out years ago, and it has sort of set the standard for the original self-help book. Welcome to Turning of the Wheel, Mitch. Great to have you on today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So set the stage for us. The name Psycho-Cybernetics has a real classic ring to it. I mean, when we think of cyber, we think of, the web, and of course the cybernetics was not invented back when this first came out. So here we are at the anniversary of this re-release book, which is beautiful, by the way, and we have this unusual topic of this self-help book, which has kind of set the stage, or sort of was sort of the iconic classic self-help book. And I'm curious, why now, and what's the book all about?
Yeah, well, people have told me that the title Psycho-Cybernetics today sounds like a 1980s heavy metal album, like Pyromania or something.
That's pretty accurate.
It has a very practical meaning behind it. It was originally written in 1960 by a cosmetic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz, and we'll talk more about him a bit later on, I suspect. He was using the term cybernetics, which was actually coined as a term for basically technological feedback. Cybernetics is the kind of technology that a heat-seeking missile, for example, works on. It receives certain information, and then the technology, in the case of a missile, the propulsion is adjusted based on the information received. He believed that we could do the same things with our minds, that we could give our minds different pieces and bits of information that we wanted to act on, information that we wanted to employ towards certain ends, and we could remake our sense of self-image, our sense of self-possibility, and essentially make our brains into more effective devices to carry out our will and our aims and our wishes. So that's what Psycho-Cybernetics means. And I published this deluxe edition, which is a hardback edition. Its casing is vegan leather. It has acid-free paper, a red ribbon place marker. It's a very nice keepsake edition.
Beautiful.
I published it because while there are many fine editions of the book out there today, I did want there to be one place where people could find the original unexpurgated text as a reader would have experienced it in 1960. So that was the purpose of putting out this deluxe edition today.
So the idea sounds kind of like the possibility of the mind over matter in some way, sort of conquering those inner fears people may have, or the inner doubts, and trying to establish a new dialogue between the self and the self. I guess that's the best way to put it.
That's it, exactly.
Of trying to sort of beef yourself up, or build yourself up, or rethink the way you rethink the way you envision yourself in a more positive light. So this was kind of a trend at the time. Norman Vincent Peale's another one, The Power of Positive Thinking, came out at that time. How does this differ, or how is it in line with that same sort of philosophy or thinking, or is it very much the same?
That's a great question. It's very much a secular iteration of the philosophy that, say, Norman Vincent Peale wrote about as a minister, or that other people wrote about coming out of the New Thought tradition. The tradition of mind power metaphysics has always held, going back to the late 19th century, that we are creative beings in the most literal sense, that our thoughts are causative, that our minds are a kind of vessel for some sort of higher influence, and that what we think plays a concrete role in what actually happens to us, not just in terms of perspective, but in concrete, very real day-to-day terms. And Maltz was interested in this philosophy, but didn't necessarily buy into the spiritual assumptions behind it. But he felt it made a great deal of sense, and it captured something of the human experience. Mm-hmm. And it also mirrored something that he had witnessed in his own patients, which I'll talk later with you about. But Maltz's aim, essentially, was to create a secular iteration of what, up until that time, had been a spiritual philosophy. Now, today we have all kinds of secular iterations of New Thought philosophy. We call them positive psychology, or we call them cognitive restructuring, or we call them neuro-linguistic programming. There's all kinds of names and terms that we use for methods that are really intended to alter reactions, to alter responses, and to alter self-image. But Maltz was writing at a time when none of those sciences, if they are sciences, had really come into their own or had come into public popularity. And he really set a template in Psycho-Cybernetics for the entire field of business motivation and other popular cognitive practices. And the book became a huge sensation. It was very widely loved by sports figures. There were athletes that sweared by the book. It was a favorite of the artist Salvador Dali, the actress Jane Fonda, the future First Lady Nancy Reagan. I was told recently that the creator of The Simpsons, Matt Groening, swears by the book. So it's attracted a wide range of attention and fealty among artists, athletes, business people who may not want to buy into a mystical view of life, but who believe that the exercises have made them more effective people.
Yeah, and it's interesting that he comes at this from the standpoint of a cosmetic surgeon, which to me I think actually makes sense, because why do people go see plastic surgeons? Because they want to feel better about themselves. This is a very logical extension of that same sort of philosophy, it seems like.
Yeah. Now, Maltz was an interesting man because he was a really pioneering cosmetic surgeon back in the day when Maltz was working. I mean, he was already very well established in 1960, but he was working as a cosmetic surgeon in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, very often dealing with burn victims or people who had suffered deformities. But even at that time, there was some rudimentary form of cosmetic surgery available for people who simply wanted to correct what they perceived as a physical imperfection. And he said that he felt that the cosmetic surgeon was as much a psychologist as a physician, because sometimes people coming to him had a perception of some sort of physical deformity or physical malady, and they had nothing abnormal about them at all, or at least nothing that you wouldn't notice unless you were just painfully scrutinizing them as they were doing to themselves. He also found something, he had an insight. He had one insight, really, that led to the development of this book, and that was that he did notice that after performing cosmetic surgical procedures on people very often, and he would stay in touch with his patients, so there was some degree of follow-up, including formal follow-up. Very often he noticed that people would experience an improved sense of self-image. But there were a fraction of cases, and a very persistent and dogged fraction, in which after successful surgeries, the patient would not experience an improved sense of self-image. And he wondered why, and he wondered where this concept of self-image really came from to begin with. And he came to feel that self-image arose from a kind of repeat loop of conversations that we have within our own psyches, a cybernetic loop of information that we repeatedly share with ourselves about ourselves, and that's what informs our strongest conception of self-image. So the things that we have repeatedly told ourselves and that we are telling ourselves constantly, wordlessly, all day long, every day, in our sleep as well, form our sense of self and inform our experience. And he felt that self-image could, in fact, be reprogrammed, that there was a kind of psychological surgery that we could do on ourselves if we were determined to rearrange this feedback loop, to interrupt this feedback loop if we were displeased with it, and substitute other things in its place so that our brains were receiving, our psyches were receiving and acting on different self-assumptions, different pieces of information, and therefore outcomes could be different.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense in some ways because there's a lot has gone into this researching this possibility in recent years, and even within the past probably 20 to 30 years. There's many different kinds of therapies such as EMDR where you're trying to, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which allows you to sort of reburn circuits in your brain. You consciously focus on it, and the use is for a lot of people who have suffered from PTSD, for example, where you're able to burn a new circuit to allow you to remove the bad or negative experience. But what we're basically talking about is trying to reprogram habits that habits or images or ideas about ourselves that may have been brought to us either by birth or by virtue of our upbringing, to the point where
That's right.
How do we reconstruct them? How do we rechannel them? How do we recreate them in a way that's more positive? You know, what you're talking about is sort of this endless worry loop people might get into of self-denigration and beating themselves up. And
That's correct, yeah.
How to stop that loop is very complex, I think.
It's very complex, and I would want to warn people because I'm not just trying to sell people on a trend or a simplistic sounding idea. I believe and I stand by the ideas in this book, but I have to caution people, as I often do, that it is very hard work. It is simple work, but it is extremely hard work. And to go into it half-hearted, well, you may as well not even begin because it's demanding. And we are not accustomed to doing demanding work with ourselves. We are kind of programmed, especially nowadays, where booze or potato chips or ice cream and the television clicker and the iPhone and everything else that distracts us is within easy reach. Mm-hmm. So we cover up interior pain rather than try to deal with it and address it. Now, Maltz's prescription, to boil it down to its simplest terms, was this. You had to set aside a half hour each day in which you would enter a meditative state and see and imagine yourself performing, acting, doing in stronger, more effective, more self-assertive, more self-confident ways. Add to that an additional half hour of meditation each day, which can be practiced at a different time, in which you just practice simple relaxation exercises, things that you might call Zen meditation or that we sometimes call body-mind stress reduction, which helps make the mind, in his estimation, more supple, more flexible, more suggestible. And then there are certain other smaller steps that he recommends throughout the book. But the thing I want to make clear to people is that if you hear about this program and you think, well, gee, that sounds great, that's something I'd like to do, bravo. But it ain't 15 minutes a day. Right. You know, it requires setting aside 1 hour a day of meditation every day. And I can tell you from personal experience, that is not easy. Everything.
No, it's very difficult.
It's very difficult, and it's I think it has gotten more difficult as time has passed because everything in our world is structured to take our attention. Your phone never stops buzzing. You have alarms. You have push notifications. You are probably burdened with meetings and other things. You're supposed to be driving the kids places every 5 minutes. Everything in life and everything in our consumer culture colludes to grab our attention. Advertisers, product sellers collude to grab our attention. Mm-hmm. So when you hear about a program like this and you say to yourself, I need this, I want to do this, I say to you that the depth of passion that you feel for this program is really going to be the sole determinant of its success, because setting aside an hour each day to meditate, and that's at a minimum, is a task that goes against everything that modern life tells us we're supposed to be doing. Meditation is now supposed to be sold to us in bite-sized chunks, and this is not what that is.
It's not about, it is extremely hard work. And I would even go so far as to say that a lot of the modern day appliances and distractions that you mentioned could actually undermine it completely by, in many cases, exacerbating low self-image. Because if you are, say, on Facebook and you see all your friends out at a restaurant and you're not invited, all of a sudden your self-esteem is going to get hit by that. So in many ways, and you might not have known, you wouldn't have known that 15, 20 years ago, but now you do know that when you see the pictures if you are an avid Facebook person. So in some ways, these things actually inflame this low self-image rather than even helping it. And aside from distraction, that's one thing. This is also adding fuel to the fire.
Yes. Plus, if you're on social media and discussing politics, you're getting abused all day. You're getting insulted all day. Mm-hmm. I mean, you post whatever news tidbit or piece of news commentary turns you on, and you'll have 10 haters on your back, within seconds of putting it up. So that kind of arguing, while it sort of feeds a sense of thrill or excitement for some people, I think is ultimately a very deleterious influence on human nature. I participate in social media all the time. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Medium, I'm on all kinds of sites. But I think we do have to be cognizant that it does build stress, it does foment conflict, it does also waste a lot of time. I mean, we piss away, if I may, just endless amounts of time with frivolities on social media. And again, as you were alluding, all of that colludes to deny us the time that would be required for a program like Psycho-Cybernetics. It's a very real, very serious program, which is why it doesn't come to you over an app. It doesn't come to you in a 5-minute bite-sized meditation. It's something much more involved than that. But if a person says to themselves, well, look, I've been carrying around a poor self-image all my life, and I am ready, so sign me up. Well, then check out the book. I don't want anybody to check it out, to be set up for disappointment. But if you're really dedicated, you'll find something there. It's not complex. It's just that it's demanding.
Well, you think about it. If it took you a lifetime to develop a poor self-image, it's going to take you quite a bit of time to undo that, I would say. I think that there's probably a quid pro quo there. Maybe not hour for hour, but at least something that says, hey, it's going to take a while to get there. And I think that
it's a real commitment,
I think that I think it sounds good in theory. I think it's much harder to achieve in practice. I think everybody wants to be happy. That's the ultimate goal. We all want to be happy, but we also have to face the fact that life is a difficult road to hoe. And getting through that requires an enormous amount of self-will and intestinal fortitude, if nothing else, just to be, to harbor your way through these rough waters each and every day, especially with all the distractions that you mentioned. I think the idea of trying to overcome this is no small feat, and I think that's what you're driving at. I understand that. But it's still the idea. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think it works? I mean, the idea of thinking of working on your self-image and trying to push away thoughts is really the control over your mind. And we know that your mind, especially when you're asleep, you don't really have a lot of control over it. You can't just say, oh, stop having this nightmare. You may wake up from a nightmare and say, but you can't just say, oh, go think of a pretty flower garden or a wonderful beach somewhere. It's not that simple. You have to really retrain yourself. So how does that work? I mean, how do people shake out of this mold? This
it depends, and I think you ask a very good question. Does it work? Because that's the only question that matters when you're dealing with some kind of a therapeutic or ethical philosophy. And my best possible response to that is that it works in tandem with the depth of your passion. If you want this, if you want to reform your self-image, if what we're talking about is resonating with a listener and he or she says, I've got to reform my self-image, I can't go another day beating up on myself or engaging in this kind of tear down of myself that I know I'm engaged in constantly, if your hunger for that is absolute, yes, it's effective. I would say the same about any self-help program. The same holds true for Alcoholics Anonymous. The same holds true for positive thinking philosophies. There's an Arab proverb that says, the way bread tastes depends on how hungry you are. I mean, I would say write that down and put it somewhere you can see it. If you're thinking about engaging in some sort of a program of recovery or spiritual therapeutics or anything like that, the depth, the way bread tastes depends how hungry you are. That's really what it comes down to. You know, people who are in a recovery program, let's say, dealing with an addiction, they will tell stories again and again of relapses. It's part of life. We are made, in a certain sense, to return to habitual behaviors, even if those behaviors are destructive. And our society is structured in a certain way to return us to those behaviors. You can't go to a social event without there being alcohol there. You can't go to Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas without your loudmouthed uncle there telling you, how the world works, or without, Fox News or some outlet of very loud, pushy opinion being in your face. It's everywhere. And we enjoy conflict in a certain way, so that's another way in which we sort of get returned either to conflictual behaviors or habitual behaviors. So you got to be really hungry. I mean, it does work. Right. But it works only for the individual who is starved for self-change.
And I would argue that at the time that this was written, it probably was more effective than it would be today due to the fact that we have so many distractions. What I'm wondering, though, is because it is so difficult, could that possibly, or does that set the stage for even increasing the low self-esteem? Because you're like, wow, this is so hard. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm no good. You get into a downward spiral as a result of stepping into this. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but you can see that this is like pushing a rock up a hill.
Right. Well, I have no patience for people in the self-help world who promise miracles, for that very reason. Mm-hmm. If someone promises a miracle and a person gets dejected or disappointed, it's either going to turn them off to the whole enterprise or it's just going to send them spending their money somewhere else. Well, I'll have to purchase the leveled up experience or the deluxe experience or what have you. Mm-hmm. And I don't want any of that, for anybody. I want for my neighbor the same thing I want for myself, which is to find a workable, ethical view of life. So again, so much depends upon the individual and what he or she brings to the table. If you read the book casually, it won't work, and it will just be a disappointing experience, or it will just drive you on to your next self-help book. I would say that I like when people are bold about programs. I mean, if someone says, listen, I have something here that I really think can rearrange your life for the better, my feeling is, okay, bravo, bring it on. Let's hear it. But I want that to be accompanied by hardcore realism, because I do believe that extraordinary things are possible in the life of the individual. I know they are. I absolutely know they are. But I also know that those things are only possible vis-a-vis the depth of the individual's intelligent, dedicated application. So my counsel is choose one book, choose one program, whether it's Psycho-Cybernetics or Alcoholics Anonymous or Think and Grow Rich, depending on what your needs are. Choose one and dig that well very, very, very deep. Dig it for 9 months. Really stick with something with absolute dedication. Don't just flutter from thing to thing. Choose one book, one program, or one philosopher who you feel is directing you towards the good life, and pursue it unreservedly. If somebody listening wants to make it Psycho-Cybernetics, great. If you want to make it something else, make it something else, but make sure that it's something that you feel is sound and solid enough and that you're sufficiently dedicated to so that you could give at least 9 months of practice and dedication to this program. Now, Maxwell Maltz, the author of Psycho-Cybernetics, he asks you to give it 21 days, and I salute that. And if you can give it 21 days, God love you, because that's a significant commitment in itself. But I would go further. I would say you have to give it 9 months. I think that's the amount of time, at least speaking from my own personal experience, in which we begin to develop different ways of viewing habitual situations. So you just have to be sure that you're in there for the distance.
I would go so far as to say that I would go so far as to say that once you start this, you probably always have to do it. I think that you may get a jump start. You may get a jump start with 9 months, and you may get yourself into a spot where you're good. But I suspect there's going to be a lot of backsliding, and you're going to have to take a refresher class or go through the routine at some point. I suspect that once you set down this road and you're dedicated to doing it, this is a lifetime of work. But nonetheless, it's like a religious faith or whatever. You have to have the belief in yourself in order to follow through with it, and perhaps that's enough to drive someone.
I mean, for me, the 9 months is more a benchmark to see, look, is this working? Is this giving back the amount of time that I'm putting in? But yes, if you find that the answer to that question is yes, and I hope you do, then it becomes that's the basis for a lifetime pursuit.
Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion because in some ways it totally makes sense. At first, I saw the plastic surgeon moniker attached to him, and I thought, gosh, it doesn't really make sense. What does he know about it? But then, what's plastic surgery all about? It's all about how you look. It's about self-image. It's about trying to preserve your youth. So he's just taking this very physical, tangible aspect of what it is to be human and flipping it and saying beauty really resides inside, and that will resonate outwardly. But I think this is a epidemic of sorts. I think self-image is a huge epidemic, and I think it is really brought about, I think, in many ways by the social media that we just referred to. I think a lot of that really ramps it up. I think that it's just a forum for setting out on a gigantic stage, walking out and just waiting for the world to take you down. You've got to have a lot of resilience to be able to make it through that storm, I think. So perhaps this is the right time.
I would suspect we're going to see more people in the years ahead cutting the cord and spending less time on social media. I mean, I've had it's occurred to me over the past few days, maybe I shouldn't be on Twitter at all. I do it because part of my business is to spread ideas like this one, so it is a way to reach people. But when you get into some of the political back and forth on Twitter, it's utterly poisonous. And I don't think human nature has changed, but the ugly parts of human nature are advertised much more loudly on social media, and it denigrates our whole culture. It makes us constant. When I was growing up, sarcasm was something that you used once in a while to make a point or to make a joke, but sarcasm today, it's the language of this generation. You see it everywhere: caustic attitudes, sarcasm, cynicism, eye-rolling. That's almost become the common tongue of our generation, and I think that's a dangerous thing. I think it denigrates our sense of other people. It ultimately denigrates our sense of ourselves. I think that we need to make a very concerted effort to use a more civil tone online. I think we're very naive about how quickly all of this has spiraled out of control and the impact that it has on us as individuals and as a community.
Oh, it's huge. It's probably the biggest change, social change in history, I think, in some ways, simply because of the fact of the way it alters the conversation people have with each other. No longer are they in face-to-face situations. They are in digital virtual rooms where things are not real. And I've even been in situations where I've been in the room with someone who posted something to Facebook, or if I posted something to Facebook, and they don't even acknowledge the fact that they've seen it, even though they would go ahead and like it in the same room. Mm-hmm. So rather than having a conversation about something I may have posted, a cartoon or whatever, I post it. All of a sudden I get a like from that person who's in the same room. But rather than having a conversation about that, they just use the like button instead, and the word, and that whole intermediary becomes exactly that. It's a very, very odd phenomenon, I think. I'm fascinated by it in a very unusual way, not so much in an admirable way, but I'm fascinated as a social change. We're talking today with Mitch Horowitz. He is the author of the editor of the re-released deluxe edition of Psycho-Cybernetics, the classic text of the classic guide to a new life by Maxwell Maltz. Maxwell Maltz was a cosmetic surgeon back in the 60s, and he wrote this book called Psycho-Cybernetics. It really is about, to summarize it, I'm going to say it quickly, the power of positive thinking and how you can change your life through careful practice, but it is no easy task. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in about 2 minutes, and we'll continue our discussion about this fascinating topic. So hang in there. We'll be right back.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Okay, we're talking today with Mitch Horowitz. He's the editor of a new released version of Psycho-Cybernetics, the classic guide to a new life, written by Maxwell Maltz. And Maxwell Maltz, as I mentioned earlier, was a cosmetic surgeon. And when I first heard about this, I thought, God, this is an unusual combination. A cosmetic surgeon writing about self-image. But what could be more natural? Self-image comes from how we perceive ourselves. We look in the mirror, we see ourselves. Do we like what we see when we see ourselves in the mirror? Do we like when our name appears in the newspaper or in a book? How does that make us feel? This is what self-image is all based on. And his approach is this concerted look to sort of untangle and demystify the idea of what we actually can do, sort of mind over matter. We want to be able to rechannel our thoughts in positive ways that allow us to have a better self-image. Do you think, Mitch, as being expert in this field and having read through this, that are there people who are irreparable? And I don't mean to be disingenuous in that regard, but are there people whose self-images are not repairable?
That's a wonderful question. There may be, yes. I mean, there may be people who have suffered from terrible traumas and for whatever reason are unable to develop the wherewithal to do the inner work that would help heal them. I mean, the same goes for addicts. You could look at an alcoholic or a heroin addict or a gambling addict and ask the question, can this person be helped? And the answer is, well, objectively, yes, of course. But we all see cases where people are tragically unable to be helped because they might have a certain kind of personality that, for whatever reason, is crippled in the area of self-discipline, or there might be other problems not of their own making that cripple their ability to apply themselves to a program of recovery. So being human is extremely difficult. It's extremely complex. It's mysterious, the manner in which habits and addictions reassert themselves. I mean, the book Alcoholics Anonymous was written in the neighborhood of 80 years ago at this point, and to this day, there's still no consensus among therapists or physicians about what an addiction is, whether it's physical, whether it's behavioral, whether it should be classified as a disease, and so forth and so on. In fact, people have very sharp divisions about these things, every bit as much so as when Alcoholics Anonymous itself was first published in 1939. So we haven't come to much in the way of terms of agreement about human nature and human behavior. And I don't know that we're ever going to. So
right.
I would say, objectively speaking, we are given the tools to help ourselves, but where the rubber hits the road, only some people are going to make it. Only some are going to make it.
Right, and it does raise the question of whether or not this is a chemical imbalance. Is it a hardwired sort of physiological construct that people are more predisposed to addiction or whatever, or that kind of process? But it also extends, I think, into the individual's environment, sort of the influences they have, the friends that they
Sure.
keep, the social circles. It may require a dramatic departure from that as well. You know,
absolutely.
You may have to change a lot about your life in order to establish this self-esteem to a place where you feel better, because you can be brought down by people around you or made to feel better by those who are around you. If you are hanging around with people who are, say, much worse off than you, you're going to feel better as a result, because you say, well, I'm not as bad off as so-and-so. So we do this sort of comparison shopping, I guess, with other people in an effort to sort of give ourselves a balanced view of ourselves, and we sort of use that as a mirroring effect. I think this book is really actually asking us to remove ourselves completely from that chatter and just focus inwardly. And in some ways, that sounds like it might be a little bit self-centered, but if the ultimate goal is to become a better person and then maybe radiate that back outwardly, then it perhaps is not that bad. But you have to admit, there is a certain element of that here.
Well, I think you're correct, although I think that we spend so much time in a self-centered state of mind that to direct that towards a viable goal, whether it's success in the direction of some ethical pursuit or whether it's the overcoming of a crippling habit or addiction or what have you, I say right on. I think a certain degree of self-survival, a certain degree of respect and self-centeredness can be helpful to the person, in fact, vitally necessary to the person who is looking to make a radical change in life. And I agree that one should be scrutinizing of who you're hanging around with, who your peer group is, because we very often select and stick with people out of habit. But I think it's very important to take note of whether we're hanging around people who are going to support us in whatever search for self-development we're engaged in or going to drag us down. Now, one thing that I would say is that anybody who's listening to this who likes the ideas that Maxwell Maltz promulgated, if you choose to explore these ideas, you don't have to go around talking to anybody about it. You don't have to advertise it to your friends or your coworkers or your colleagues. There may even be cases where you shouldn't talk to family members or even spouses about it, for that matter, because if you feel you're just going to get some sort of depleting or denigrating remark, keep it private. Keep it private. It's very important not to feel that your own personal search for improvement and development is somehow subject to the approval of other people. People can be quite hostile. Sometimes they're jealous. Sometimes they just get a thrill, a very ugly thrill, out of putting other people down. Sometimes they feel threatened for reasons that they don't even understand. Ultimately, ultimately, that's of secondary importance. The big thing is that you not put yourself in the path of it. So I often tell people when they're embarking on a self-help program or some sort of a program of spiritual self-study, it's better not to talk to people about it unless you have a group, like a 12-step group or something else where you feel that sharing those intimacies is helpful and is a kind of supporting experience. But otherwise, I would say remain silent. It's your private experiment. It belongs to you.
Yeah, and I think the whole idea of self-image it's like a habit of sorts. It's a learned habit that's developed over years. So in some ways, it is an addiction because people may like to wallow in their own stew, so to speak, of this.
Yeah.
This sort of this self-pittiness. I think self-pity can be an addiction in itself because it's
without
a place
question.
you can go. It allows you sort of an excuse to, indulge in bad behavior. Oh, I'm not a good person, so therefore I'm going to go out and get drunk or whatever. I think it has
Absolutely.
that same physiological component to it that would allow people to do that. So I think that to overcome this is very similar to overcoming an addiction in some ways. I think that
yes.
I think you're right on when you say that this is no walk in the park. This is going to be some serious work you're going to do. And I actually think that the 9 months is appropriate, but I think it's probably a lifetime exercise that you're going to pull out and use every once in a while. You've got to really have a conversation with yourself. This is what this is about. It's about how you talk about yourself and how you converse, and we all do that. We're very complicated. We're very complicated species, and it's almost a handicap of sorts to be able to have that. Many of us would love to be able to just wipe out these negative thoughts and be good with it, but I don't think it's quite that easy.
Right.
It's interesting, though. I mean, the idea of trying to change this. It's not just sitting in front of a mirror and saying, "I'm good, I'm good, I'm good." Over. There's far more work involved here. It might involve some past life therapy where you go over the bad events of your life, revisit them. That's kind of what the basis of EMDR is, which is also the idea of sort of rechanneling these circuits in your brain so that instead of going to a negative reaction, you go to something different in its place.
Yes. And there's all kinds of cognitive and neuroscience studies today that have validated what you're describing, and those studies did not exist or existed in much fewer number in 1960 when this book was written. But I would say that's cause for cheer, but don't get sidelined by that because something is new and because something has the label of neuroscience and because something might have been the subject of a TED Talk at some point. That doesn't mean that it's better or more practical than some of the golden oldies, as I'd like to put it. I don't think we found a program for addiction recovery, for example, that surpasses AA. I don't think we found a business motivation program that surpasses Think and Grow Rich. I don't think we found a modern moral philosophy that surpasses the essays of Ralph Waldo Emerson. So I place a lot of stock in the so-called golden oldies, and I think that if you're interested in some sort of motivational technique, some sort of technique that can lead to an upbuilding of self-respect, of improved self-image, I think you can take heart from the fact that there are neuroscience studies today that validate what Maltz was saying, but you don't have to be concerned, oh gosh, this is kind of old-fashioned, I ought to choose something that's from the 21st century. What you want is to choose something that works. The scientific validation has come because Maltz, as a philosopher, as a physician, and as somebody with impeccable instincts for human nature, was right. So it only builds his case, and I think that in terms of a secular program of self-development, self-motivation, I don't think he's been surpassed. I think what you'll find in some of the big names today in motivation, like a Tony Robbins, is really a leaf from Maxwell Maltz. He really set the mold for the whole field of business motivation. I love some of the contemporary folks, but really nothing that they're saying or doing has surpassed Maltz's insights.
Right, he sort of sets the stage for it, and sort of was the one to try to recreate. But the idea is that we all know life is difficult. We know that life is fraught with challenges. Is it realistic to think that this is not a denial of hardship. This is not a denial of reality. we're not trying to sidestep, I think, through this process, are we? I mean, do you think that's accurate? I mean, we know that life's difficult. People are going to leave our lives. You know, we're going to lose our jobs. We're going to elect people we don't like. All of these things are part of life. That is reflective on the self-image. Is that something that can be altered permanently, or is it just is it a Pollyanna-ish way of looking at life through rose-colored glasses?
Right. I see what you're saying. I think that if I understand what you're getting at, it is true that there are circumstances that are going to hit us hard and that are going to affect us psychologically. And I agree, that's a fact of life. I would also say that not every physical malady is in the imagination. Not every physical challenge we face is a matter of self-image. Some of those things are, of course, concretely and sometimes tragically real, but facing them with the best possible aptitude is something that I think is a worthy task for every driven man and woman. And yes, tragedies are going to come. I think, as a friend of mine puts it, most of us are going to experience a 50-50 mixture of joyous and tragic events in life. That seems to be the bargain that life strikes with us. So yes, there are going to be things that are going to be wounding. There's absolutely no question about that. But at the same time, certain resiliencies can be built. You know, I think if a person has a proclivity towards anger, for example, and deals with every problem through the exercise of anger, through the venting of anger, that person, by and large, is likely to lead a more isolated, more desperate life when things go bad. So work on that before things go bad. Work on that when you're dealing with circumstances that don't hit you with some kind of crippling blow. And you will be better at dealing with crises when they strike, as they will inevitably strike. But you have to be able to deal with those crises.
You're building some resiliency is what you're looking for.
Some resiliency, and I don't think it's unrealistic. You know, I would never proffer a false promise to anybody, but I do see people who engage in the same repeat behaviors over and over the course of their lives, and although some people might escape the consequences of that, mostly that leads to isolation and sometimes to ill health.
Isolation could be a byproduct. I can see how that could happen for sure. You know, it is interesting when we think about this, especially now, I think more than ever, where we're swept into a river of public of views and opinions that is inevitable, especially if you live in a city such as New York, where you're just bombarded. I mean, the stimulus there is insurmountable. I mean, you see huge billboards of beautiful women, and we're like, how can I ever look like that? You know, how can a woman ever look like that? And these standards are held up to us, so it makes it very difficult for us, I think, to surmount our own ability of our own self-image. Because there's always, no matter how good you are, there's always somebody better. And that seems like this myth of Sisyphus kind of conundrum.
Well, that is a fact, although I would say that most pain that I experience, that I see other people experience, is pain that comes from feeling that you didn't do something in life at the highest ability of excellence that you felt yourself capable of doing it. And that's the position that you never want to be in. Yes, there's always going to be a loss. Yes, there's always going to be a day where, you know, there's some age catches up with us, circumstance catches up with us, where the tide metaphorically washes out, and that has to be accepted. Mortality alone tells us that. But regrets come not from a turn of the circumstantial wheel. They come from feeling that one never really attempted with excellence and certainty and skill to do what one was capable of doing. I don't think you ever want to be in that position where you feel like you never really stepped up at bat, or you never really learned how to bat because it was more convenient, more secure, more safe to do other things. That, to me, is where truly heart-rending regrets come from. We're always going to face circumstances, but we want to feel that we made not only our best efforts, but we trained in order to make those efforts. We tried, not tried in some vainglorious way, but tried as a result of hours of training and skill and effort and preparation, so that when we tried, we knew what we were doing when we stepped up to the plate and swung. But to never reach that point, I think that probably would leave a person with deep regrets.
Right. One of the best ways I have learned in my life to deal with tragedy or, a sense of failure or whatever the case may be, whatever may dictate your terms, the idea of low self-esteem. And I found that one of the best ways was a way of giving back, sort of providing charity in some ways. The act of simple giving to others can be very rewarding. It does help you feel better about yourself. It's a proven fact. Does that work in conjunction with this in some ways? I mean, much of self-image, you can't just be completely self-centered in that regard. You've got to embrace part of society and those around you as well. You've got to be able to extend your self-image to other people. Wouldn't that have to happen through other people? I mean, in the use of giving?
Well, the way I look at it is that we're all here to be generative in one way or another. So whatever it is that you do, whether you work with your hands, whether you're a professional, whether you're an artist, whether you're creating a life for your kids, whatever it is that you do, in order for it to be successful, should be generative in some way, should build another's experience in some productive and authentic way. And I don't mean that in just some sort of a squishy, kind of kumbaya fashion. I mean, right. You should be, if you're going to build a bridge, that bridge should stand, and that bridge should be something that facilitates the safe passage and transportation of other people, and you will know that you have lived out some sense of purpose. I mean, I think one of the things that people sort of misunderstand sometimes in our culture, or at least in certain reaches of our culture, is that the founding and the running of a successful business, for example, can be a tremendous act of self-realization, can be a tremendous act of self-affirmation. And without using this particular language, you will feel the experience of having been generative, of having produced something in this world, of having lived out your life in a worthy way. It feels good for a reason. It's not just ego or vainglory. We use the term ego too much. Frankly, I'm not always sure I even understand what people mean when they're using the term ego. It's one of those words that we lean on so heavily.
I think it's a reflection of narcissism, sort of self-centeredness is that's how I read it,
Yeah, and it has its uses for sure, but the fact is, I think that an individual's sense of success in whatever their pursuit is a very legitimate sense of self, because I think that the fulfillment of some sort of generativity is basic to what it means to be human. And for different people, that's going to be expressed in different ways. For for one person, that might be the founding of a business. For another person, it might be artistic. For another person, it might have something to do with the martial arts or serving in the military. Whatever it is, you'll know that direction in which you're called. You'll know that direction in which barriers seem to be lowered, in which you feel possibilities open to you because you have a facility with it. And if you have a facility with it, the ability to be productive, to be generative, to get things done, I do think is not only in itself an act of giving back to others, but it's something that makes you feel like you've lived a worthy life.
I mean, is your bottom line on this something that you think that this is something that works for all people? I mean, that's too broad of a question. I mean, let's put it this way. Do you think all people have an element of low self-esteem?
Not all people, not our president-elect. I mean, he doesn't seem to wrestle with low self-esteem. I don't think he needs to read Psycho-Cybernetics.
No, but he's on the other extreme.
Right. He needs
another
something
book
else.
For him out there. Yeah.
He needs to read the Beatitudes or something, yeah, and quick. But I think for most of us that...
Yeah.
Yeah, for most of us, that's certainly true. I mean, there's a handful of us who have been raised in affirming circumstances, and there's certainly a golden handful of people who seem to have been sent out into the world with a realistic sense of self-capacity. But I think most of us probably do not function up to the level of which we are capable. People accuse the positive thinking movement of filling people up with fantasies about their own capacities and abilities and getting them high on these kind of unicorn impossibilities that they'll never be able to reach. But that's not the human problem. The human problem is that we take too low an estimation of our own capacities. But the adjoining problem is that before one just nods one's head in agreement with that and says, yeah, right on, to live up to our capacities does require a great deal of work and training. So it's not just a question of me sitting here and saying, gee, I'd like to be an astronaut. Well, that's not a viable goal. I'm not, in physical proximity or of physical age or possessed of the resources that make that a viable goal. But to be productive, to be real, to be generative, there's something else that is closer and is perhaps equally magnetic that I can do. But coming to that momentary realization is not enough. It needs to be accompanied by a great deal of work, both inner work, like the Psycho-Cybernetics program, and outer work, consisting of whatever the training is. So the trouble is not that we have imaginary views of our own capacities. The trouble is that we don't live up to our viable capacities, and that can be changed. I have no question about that.
Yeah, I think there's an element that's true, but we are not equal. We aren't all going to be number one, and we have to be able to live within the framework of whatever we do. I think it's probably what it is taking stock of where you are, being happy with what you've got, and going against that. But I think with so much reflective and comparative data out there for us, it's almost impossible for us to see that and how to get out of that. It's a very difficult challenge, but I think it's a viable challenge. It's
a viable challenge.
Yeah, that can make people different and make them see life differently. I think that there is a happy medium between something that Maltz offers and perhaps what the Buddhists offer, sort of being in the present, sort of this idea of accepting what we are. We have to accept the bad. We can't just deny it and say it doesn't exist. Like I said, life is not a rosy road. But if we can adapt and be pliable to those whims of the life that throws our way, I think we can probably come out okay. But it is about how well we do that. And I think the point you made earlier about this sense of resilience is important because you're sort of building in an immune system to when the hardship does come, because you're saying, yes, this is going to be inevitable, but I'm going to get through it because I've got strong self-esteem. And that's probably an interesting piece. We've been talking today with Mitch Horowitz. He is the editor of the reissued book called Psycho-Cybernetics. It is a fantastically, beautifully produced book. It's very rich. It looks kind of like a little Bible almost. It's got that same sort of red sheen on the outside of the pages, and it's got the red marker, and beautifully done hardback edition. It's a classic guide to a new life, and the idea is put forth by a cosmetic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz from the 1960s when he first wrote this, and it went on to become quite popular with a number of highly regarded people who use it as their sort of, I guess, as a lack of a better word, their Bible, the Bible on self-esteem and how to achieve it. And I think it's an interesting and worthy pursuit. But as Mitch has mentioned, it is no easy pursuit. It does require the work of the individual. And I wonder, did Maltz in his life ever do any follow-up work with people who had taken this sort of path?
He stayed in touch with patients over extended periods of time. So he was speaking from his experience of personal case studies with patients who had come to him. That was probably the most formal structure that he had set up for follow-up. After he published the book, of course, the book became a widely popular book. It was a very big bestseller throughout the 1960s. And so I suspect his ability to stay in touch with people was reduced. But as a cosmetic surgeon, when he was forming his first concepts about the formation and revision of self-image, he certainly did follow up and stay in touch with patients.
Yeah. So have you gone down the road of this? Have you gone down this road? Have you tried this?
Oh yeah, I have, absolutely. I've adapted it to my own practice and lifestyle. I practice transcendental meditation, and that involves about 25 minutes of meditating early in the day, 25 minutes in the evening. So there is a certain limit, unless I decide to become a Trappist monk, to how much meditation I can fit into my day. I have other things I need to do, but I have adapted Maltz's self-image exercises, and I think they've become a vital part of my daily practice.
Do you think that they work in tangent with the transcendental practice, or do you think that
personally, yes, I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think it's very important that a person have some kind of meditation program that's part of their routine. My choice has been transcendental meditation, which I find very helpful and something that sort of presents itself as a technique that can be fit within the rigors of a very busy day, and that also can have very wonderful effects for the individual. Whatever you choose, I think it's important to have some meditation program in place. So you may come to this book and already have a meditation program. So I would say, use your best judgment and find a way to adapt it to the program that Maltz is prescribing, so that you can manage everything within the space of an 18-hour day.
And then how do you measure your success? I mean, do you wake up in the morning and say, gosh, I'm feeling like on top of the world today? I mean, that can't happen to you every day. There's got to be days when you're not feeling 100%. Is that based on your image of yourself, or is that based on just the challenges of daily living?
I measure it based on whether I'm able to follow through in the world on what my deepest desires are for myself, for my family, for other people around me. I think that my measure of success is a very concrete one, and I think that we all have ambitions and wishes and projects that we want to take out into the world. Now, there are people within the alternative spiritual culture, of which I am a part, who will say, well, it's a mistake, it's a trap to get attached to the outer and so forth. I have conflicted feelings about that. I think that we live in the world of Caesar in as much as we live in the unseen world. They're both a part of life. They both have claims and demands on us. And we are here in this world for a very fixed, limited amount of time. And that amount of time can come to an end unexpectedly. So I think that the things that a person wishes to accomplish in this world are sacred and are valid and are valuable. So to be frank with you, I measure my success in an outer way in as much as I do in an inner way. I don't even like using those terms because to connote some sort of a sharp line of difference between the interior and the exterior, I think is just playing games with metaphors, quite frankly. I don't even really think most of the time in those terms. But what I'm really trying to get at is that whatever it is you want to accomplish, whatever it is you want to bring into the world, that alone presents you, I think, with a valid measure of your success. If you're suffering inside, if you're unhappy, if you're going through life with a state of desperation, that's obviously a sign that something is grossly wrong. If you're walking around with fear, that's a sign that something is grossly wrong. So we could speak of the interior, perhaps, in terms of the emotions, but I think that what a person sets out to want to achieve in the world has a sacredness to it, and it has a very fixed amount of time to it, because these lives come to an end after a certain number of decades and maybe sooner. So I think that what it is that you want to accomplish in life, and you ought to be very honest with yourself about it, is a viable measure of whether the ethical philosophy or the spiritual philosophy that you're leaning upon is working for you.
Yeah, that's true. And I think the best question really is, when you're doing that measurement of success, what is your parameter? What are your parameters? Are you measuring it against somebody who's your competitor? Are you measuring it against a peer? Those are the things that I think become difficult, because those set the stage for us having low self-esteem. I didn't write a good enough book. I didn't produce a good enough radio show. Somebody else did a better job. There's always going to be that. I think that's part of the challenge. But nonetheless, that is, you've got to take a step in some direction in order to get the ball moving in that direction. And this book has lived the life long enough and it has influenced enough people that it must have some value.
It certainly has posterity.
It certainly has posterity, yeah. And it's been, and people such as Salvador Dali and, as you mentioned, Jane Fonda and Nancy Reagan, of all people, found it to be useful. So it can be useful in any way, I think. So, well, anyway, Mitch, thanks so much for talking today. We've been talking today with Mitch Horowitz. He is an editor at Harcher Penguin, and the book that has just been released is called Psycho-Cybernetics. It is a re-release of a time-tested classic by Maxwell Maltz, who is a famous cosmetic surgeon who went on to teach people about self-esteem. Thank you so much for coming on today, Mitch. It's always fun to talk to you, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.